wasn't just entertainment, it was revolution. This was the decade when filmmakers stopped treating sci-fi like kid stuff and started building sprawling epics, terrifying nightmares, and paranoid visions of the future. Some of these films reshaped Hollywood itself, while others became cult legends that refused to fade away. Which 70s sci-fi masterpiece still feels just as thrilling, terrifying, or mind-blowing when you press play today? Let's dive in. Soylent Green, 1973. The 1970s gave us plenty of dystopias, but few hit as close to home as Soylent Green. Set in a crumbling New York City in the year 2022, this bleak vision imagines a world overrun by overpopulation, pollution, and scarcity. The streets are crowded, the air is filthy, and food is so scarce that people depend on processed rations produced by a megacorporation. The most popular product, Soylent Green, marketed as a miracle food made from ocean plankton. At the center of the story is Detective Thorne, played with weary grit by Charlton Heston. Thorne stumbles into a murder investigation that seems routine but unravels into a conspiracy far bigger than he expected. As he digs deeper, he discovers the horrifying truth behind Soylent Green's production, a revelation that has since become one of the most infamous plot twists in film history. What makes Soylent Green so powerful isn't just the mystery, it's the atmosphere. Director Richard Fleischer paints a future that feels claustrophobic and suffocating. Crowds pack stairwells just to find a place to sleep. Riots break out over rations. Even everyday life feels like survival. The movie doesn't rely on flashy effects, but on a suffocating sense of decay that feels disturbingly plausible. Adding to its emotional weight is Edward G. Robinson's role as Thorne's elderly roommate, Sewell. His performance was poignant not only on screen, but off. It was the legendary actor's final role before his death, making his farewell scene even more heartbreaking. When it was released, Soylent Green tapped directly into anxieties about environmental collapse, corporate power, and population growth. Nearly 50 years later, it feels less like fantasy and more like a chilling warning. The film's final moments, with Heston's desperate cry, still echo in pop culture. Soylent Green isn't just sci-fi, it's a grim mirror, forcing us to ask if we're heading toward the same future it predicted. Watching unfold. Alien 1979. Science fiction had spaceships. Horror had haunted houses. Ridley Scott decided to merge them, and out came Alien, a film that redefined both genres in one stroke. This wasn't a shiny, optimistic future. It was grimy, industrial, and terrifyingly real. The crew of the Nostromo wasn't a band of heroes. They were space truckers, blue-collar workers just trying to haul cargo across the galaxy. And that's what made the horror hit so hard. The setup is simple: a distress call, a mysterious planet, and a creature that should never have been discovered. But once the alien bursts into the story, literally, the movie becomes a masterclass in suspense. The xenomorph, designed by H.R. Giger, is still one of the most horrifying creations in cinema, equal parts mechanical nightmare and predatory beast. Sigourney Weaver's Ripley turned into a landmark character, breaking barriers for women in sci-fi by proving the final survivor could also be the smartest, toughest person on screen. Her journey from cautious crew member to full-on warrior remains one of the most satisfying arcs in film. What sets Alien apart is its atmosphere. The dark corridors of the Nostromo drip with dread, every shadow hiding danger, every sound a potential threat. The tension doesn't come from big action scenes, it comes from what you don't see, what you fear might be lurking just out of sight. On release, critics praised its chilling intensity, and audiences couldn't get enough of its blend of science fiction spectacle and raw terror. Decades later, Alien isn't just one of the best sci-fi films of the 70s, it's one of the greatest films ever made. It proved that in space, no one can hear you scream, but everyone can hear a franchise being born. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. Not all 70s science fiction was about fear and dystopia. Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind dared to make aliens something other than monsters. Instead, it treated contact with extraterrestrials as a moment of awe, mystery, and profound beauty. The film follows Roy Neary, played by Richard Dreyfuss, an ordinary man whose life unravels after a strange encounter with a UFO. What makes the story so compelling is that it's not about scientists or soldiers, it's about regular people swept up in something larger than themselves. Spielberg captures the wonder and terror of the unknown in a way that feels deeply human. Visually, the film was groundbreaking. The glowing spacecraft, the surreal lights in the night sky, and that unforgettable final landing scene remain some of the most breathtaking images ever put on screen. John Williams' five-note musical motif didn't just become iconic, it became the literal language of communication between humans and aliens. The production wasn't easy. Spielberg had to fight for creative control, but his vision paid off. The film was a critical and commercial success, proving that audiences wanted sci-fi that inspired as much as it thrilled. Close Encounters is ultimately a movie about obsession, faith in the unknown, and the childlike wonder of looking up at the sky and asking, "Are we alone?" It's not about fear of what's out there. It's about the hope that first contact could bring something extraordinary. Even decades later, the film radiates magic. It doesn't just show us aliens, it shows us ourselves, standing small against the infinite, yet daring to reach out with music, light, and imagination. That's why Close Encounters isn't just a film, it's a cinematic experience that still makes you believe. Logan's Run, 1976. Imagine a world where turning 30 isn't the start of adulthood, it's the end of your life. That's the twisted premise of Logan's Run, a film that perfectly captures 70s sci-fi's obsession with dystopian control. In this future society, pleasure is endless, but freedom is a lie. Everyone lives under a dome, and once the clock runs out on your 30th birthday, you face renewal, a fancy word for state-mandated death. The story follows Logan, a sandman whose job is to hunt down runners trying to escape their fate. But when Logan himself starts questioning the system, he becomes a fugitive, flipping from enforcer to rebel in a heartbeat. It's part chase movie, part dystopian thriller, and part retro-futuristic spectacle. Visually, the film is pure 70s charm. The sets are filled with glowing domes, colorful costumes, and a vision of the future that looks dated today but remains fascinating. The carousel sequence, where citizens willingly march to their end under the illusion of rebirth, is as chilling now as it was then. When it debuted, the film got mixed reviews, overshadowed just a year later by Star Wars. But over time, Logan's Run found its cult following. Its themes of youth obsession, government control, and the cost of utopia are as relevant as ever, especially in an era still obsessed with beauty and longevity. Sure, some effects look old-fashioned, but that's part of its charm. Logan's Run isn't just a sci-fi chase story. It's a time capsule of 70s imagination and paranoia, asking whether eternal pleasure is worth the price of freedom. And if you think the answer is obvious, just try putting yourself in Logan's shoes when the clock starts blinking. Westworld, 1973. Long before Jurassic Park warned us about playing God, Michael Crichton gave us Westworld, a film that asked what happens when technology designed for fun stops playing by the rules. Set in a futuristic theme park where guests can live out fantasies in Wild West, Roman, or medieval worlds, the hook is irresistible. Want to duel a gunslinger? Go ahead, he's just a robot. Or at least that's what the guests are told. The setup quickly spirals into a nightmare when the machines start malfunctioning. Suddenly, the fantasy world turns deadly, and the visitors find themselves fighting for survival. The chilling centerpiece is the gunslinger, played by Yul Brynner with cold, relentless menace. He isn't just a malfunctioning machine, he's the prototype for countless unstoppable villains that came later, from the Terminator to the Matrix. What makes Westworld such a standout is how far ahead of its time it was. It tapped into questions about artificial intelligence, corporate greed, and humanity's arrogance in thinking we could control technology forever. And let's be honest, the sight of Brynner's blank robotic stare is still enough to send a shiver down your spine. Though the special effects look dated by today's standards, the ideas remain razor-sharp. In fact, HBO turned the concept into a prestige TV series decades later, proving just how enduring Crichton's nightmare vision was. Westworld isn't just retro sci-fi, it's a cautionary tale that predicted exactly how thrilling, terrifying, and dangerously addictive virtual reality could be. The only difference is today, you don't need a ticket to a theme park to feel like you're living inside one. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. If you like your science fiction with a dose of paranoia and lab coats, The Andromeda Strain is the 70s classic that still delivers. Based on Michael Crichton's best-selling novel, the film dives into a nightmare scenario. A satellite crashes back to Earth, carrying a mysterious microorganism that wipes out an entire town. Suddenly, the fate of humanity rests in the hands of a team of scientists working in a high-tech underground lab. Unlike the flashy space battles of its era, this movie thrives on a cold, clinical atmosphere. Director Robert Wise, who also made The Day the Earth Stood Still, keeps things tense and meticulous. Every shot of sealed doors, sterilized rooms, and blinking computer consoles reinforces the feeling that the tiniest mistake could mean the end of the world. The brilliance of the Andromeda Strain is how grounded it feels. The science may be fictional, but the procedures, the debates, and the sense of intellectual pressure are incredibly convincing. The film builds suspense not through monsters or aliens, but through the sheer terror of something invisible, something too small to see but powerful enough to destroy us. When it was released, the movie stood out for its realism, even earning Academy Award nominations for its visuals and editing. Today, it feels eerily timely, reminding us how fragile our systems are in the face of biological threats. The Andromeda Strain doesn't want to dazzle you with laser beams, it wants to scare you with the possibility that our end might come quietly, under a microscope. And honestly, that's just as terrifying as any xenomorph lurking in the shadows. THX 1138, 1971. Before George Lucas took us to galaxies far, far away, he created a very different kind of sci-fi vision. THX 1138, 1971. Forget swashbuckling heroes and droids. This is a stark dystopian nightmare. The film drops viewers into a sterile future where emotions, individuality, and even love are outlawed. People are kept in line through drugs, surveillance, and faceless authority. It's as cold and unsettling as science fiction gets. The story follows THX, played by Robert Duvall, a worker who begins to break free from the system after refusing to take his state-issued medication. His rebellion is quiet at first, but it grows into a desperate escape from a world designed to crush the human spirit. Stylistically, THX 1138 is fascinating. Lucas used minimalist sets, stark white environments, and robotic voices to create a sense of suffocating control. It feels less like a blockbuster and more like a warning, a glimpse into a future where convenience and conformity have erased what makes us human. At the time, audiences weren't quite ready for Lucas's grim vision, and the movie struggled commercially. But over the decades, it's been reassessed as a vital piece of dystopian cinema. You can even see seeds of ideas Lucas would later expand in Star Wars: authoritarian governments, soulless control, and the human need for rebellion. THX 1138 might not have the crowd-pleasing spectacle of Lucas's later work, but it has something else. An uncompromising look at the dangers of technology and authoritarianism. It's not a popcorn flick. It's a wake-up call wrapped in futuristic imagery. And for anyone who thinks Lucas only knew how to do space fantasy, this film proves he could do hard, cold dystopia just as well. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. By the late 70s, remakes had a bad reputation. But then came Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. Which didn't just match the original, it may have surpassed it. Building on the 1956 classic, this version traded small-town America for the paranoia-soaked streets of San Francisco, where humanity's greatest fear comes true, we're being replaced. The premise is simple, yet chilling. Alien pods replicate humans, creating emotionless copies that erase the originals. What makes this version so unforgettable is how deeply it taps into 70s anxieties. This was a decade already rife with distrust in institutions, government scandals, and the creeping fear that modern life was stripping us of our individuality. The film turned those fears into a body horror nightmare. Donald Sutherland leads a cast that also includes Leonard Nimoy and Jeff Goldblum, each playing characters who slowly realize the terrifying scope of the invasion. Director Philip Kaufman builds tension masterfully, making every glance, every whisper, and every shadow feel like it could hide something inhuman. And then there's the ending. Without spoiling, Let's just say it remains one of the most shocking, devastating finales in sci-fi history. Even decades later, it has the power to make audiences gasp. The special effects, while restrained, are unsettlingly effective. Creeping vines, gooey pods, and distorted human shapes all add to the feeling that something isn't right. It's not flashy, but it doesn't need to be. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is more than just a remake. It's a reinvention that perfectly captured its era's mood. It's proof that paranoia doesn't age, and when it comes to losing your identity, the fear never really goes away. Silent Running, 1972. Before Wall-E charmed audiences with a lonely robot tending to Earth's trash, Silent Running gave us a story about one man, 3 drones, and the last living forests of humanity. Directed by Douglas Trumbull, the legendary special effects artist behind 2001, A Space Odyssey, the film is a quiet yet powerful meditation on environmental destruction and human responsibility. The premise is hauntingly simple. Earth has become barren, and the last remnants of plant life are preserved in giant domes floating in space. Freeman Lowell, played by Bruce Dern, is a botanist tasked with caring for these precious ecosystems. When orders come down to destroy the domes and return the ship to commercial use, Lowell makes a desperate choice, defying orders and fighting to protect what little nature is left. What makes Silent Running stand out is its emotional core. Dern gives a raw, vulnerable performance, portraying a man who loves the beauty of life so much he's willing to risk everything for it. The drones, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, add an unexpected tenderness, becoming some of the most memorable non-human companions in sci-fi. The film's visuals, especially for its time, are stunning. The domes are both futuristic and fragile, a reminder of how easily paradise can be destroyed. And the folk-inspired soundtrack by Joan Baez gives the story an almost mournful, poetic atmosphere. On release, Silent Running didn't make waves like Star Wars or Alien, but its legacy has only grown. Today, it feels prophetic, echoing modern concerns about climate change and ecological collapse. It's not an action-packed spectacle, it's a heartfelt warning dressed as science fiction, and it proves that sometimes the most powerful sci-fi stories aren't about conquering the stars, but about saving what we already have. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Not all 70s science fiction was sleek spaceships and future utopias. A Boy and His Dog took a completely different route, straight into the wasteland. Based on Harlan Ellison's novella, the film is a twisted, blackly comedic look at survival after nuclear war. The boy is Vic, a cynical drifter played by a young Don Johnson, and the dog is Blood, a telepathic canine with more brains than his human partner. Together, they wander a devastated Earth where food is scarce, danger is constant, and morality has long since collapsed. What makes the film so unique is the bizarre relationship between Vic and Blood. Their banter is equal parts funny and cutting, with the dog often serving as the moral compass in a world that's lost its way. The movie's second half shifts into even stranger territory when Vic discovers an underground society trying to rebuild civilization. But their version of order turns out to be just as unsettling as the chaos above. The sharp satire is obvious. The film isn't really about post-apocalyptic survival, it's about the absurd ways humans cling to control when the world is already gone. Critics were divided at the time. Some thought it was too bleak, others admired its daring bite. Over the years, though, it has become a cult classic, influencing later dystopian tales, including Mad Max. A Boy and His Dog isn't easy viewing, but that's the point. It's messy, abrasive, and strangely funny, in a way that makes you question whether you should be laughing at all. That uncomfortable blend is exactly why it still stands out in the crowded landscape of post-apocalyptic sci-fi, The Omega Man, 1971. Long before I Am Legend brought the story back to the screen, Charlton Heston carried the torch as Robert Neville in The Omega Man. Based on Richard Matheson's novel, the film dropped viewers into an eerie, nearly deserted Los Angeles, where Neville might be the last man alive, at least the last normal one. By day, he roams the empty streets, fortified in his home, trying to fend off loneliness and boredom. By night, he faces off against the Family, a cult-like group of mutated survivors who reject technology and view Neville as the ultimate enemy. It's man versus the remnants of humanity, and the tension never lets up. What makes the Omega Man fascinating is how much it reflects its era. Released in the early 70s, the film is dripping with post-nuclear anxieties, Cold War paranoia, and even a healthy dose of counterculture critique. The mutants aren't just villains, they're a distorted mirror of societal fears about technology, science, and change. Charlton Heston, who had already solidified himself as a sci-fi star with Planet of the Apes, brings his signature gravitas to the role. He's tough, stoic, but clearly unraveling under the pressure of isolation. While some of the effects and costumes may look dated today, the film's imagery, deserted cities, flickering torches, and Neville's lonely fortress remains powerful. It's a movie less about action and more about atmosphere, and it nails that feeling of being truly alone in a world that's moved on without you. The Omega Man may not be the flashiest of 70s sci-fi, but it carved out a lasting legacy. It's grim, stylish, and memorable. The kind of survival story that makes you wonder how long you'd last when the lights finally go out. Phase 4, 1974. If you've ever swatted at an ant and thought nothing of it, Phase 4 will make you think again. This strange, hypnotic film turns one of the smallest creatures on Earth into humanity's greatest threat. Directed by Saul Bass, yes, the legendary graphic designer behind some of Hollywood's most iconic title sequences, the movie is as visually experimental as it is unsettling. The premise sounds simple. After a mysterious cosmic event, ants begin evolving at an alarming rate, developing intelligence and a collective purpose. Two scientists set up a research base in the desert to study the phenomenon, but it quickly becomes clear that the ants aren't just organizing, they're planning. What makes Phase 4 so unforgettable is its style. Bass uses macro photography to show ants in ways audiences had never seen before, making them feel alien, strategic, and unstoppable. The slow, methodical pacing builds a creeping dread, as if the world is quietly tipping toward a future where humans are no longer on top of the food chain. Unlike other monster movies of the era, there's no giant beast smashing cities here. The horror comes from precision, inevitability, and the unsettling idea that the tiniest creatures could quietly outthink and outlast us. The film didn't succeed at the box office and was largely overlooked, but it's developed a strong cult following among sci-fi fans who appreciate its boldness. And its ending, especially the original long-lost cut, remains one of the most chilling and surreal conclusions in science fiction history. Phase 4 isn't about spectacle, it's about unease, the kind that seeps under your skin. If you want a 70s sci-fi that feels like a waking dream mixed with a nightmare, this is the one. Capricorn One, 1977. The conspiracy that felt too real, 308 words. The 70s were a paranoid decade, and no sci-fi film captured that better than Capricorn One. Imagine this. A crew of astronauts prepares for a mission to Mars. The countdown begins, the world watches in awe, and then the astronauts are pulled from the rocket at the last second. The launch is faked, the mission is a lie, and the government will do anything to cover it up. That's the chilling setup of Capricorn One, a film that plays out like a thriller more than traditional science fiction. Once the astronauts, led by James Brolin and Sam Waterston, realize they're pawns in a massive hoax, the story becomes a desperate fight for survival, with government agents hunting them down to protect the lie. The movie tapped directly into the public's distrust of institutions in the 70s, fueled by Watergate and conspiracy theories swirling around the Apollo missions. That's what made it so effective. Audiences didn't just watch the story, they half believed it could really happen. Director Peter Hyams keeps the tension sharp, balancing desert chases, cover-ups, and a growing sense of dread. And yes, there's even an iconic sequence featuring a biplane chase that remains a standout of 70s cinema. While not as widely remembered as Alien or Star Wars, Capricorn One deserves its place in the pantheon for how well it captured the paranoia of its time. It's less about space exploration and more about the lies we're willing to accept from those in power. Today, it plays like a time capsule of 70s distrust, but also as a reminder that sometimes the scariest science fiction isn't about aliens at all. It's about us, The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. Few casting choices in film history feel as perfect as David Bowie playing an alien. In The Man Who Fell to Earth, Bowie stars as Thomas Jerome Newton, a being from another world who arrives on Earth in search of water for his dying planet. What follows isn't a standard sci-fi adventure, but a deeply strange hypnotic journey through greed, corruption, and the collapse of dreams. Newton uses his advanced knowledge to build a business empire, planning to finance a rescue mission for his home world. But Earth isn't kind to outsiders, and the very wealth and power he amasses become the traps that unravel him. It's not lasers and space battles, it's about loneliness, alienation, and how easily human ambition devours even the purest intentions. Director Nicholas Roeg gives the film an otherworldly style, filled with fragmented editing, surreal imagery, and Bowie's haunting presence. The result is a movie that feels less like a narrative and more like a fever dream, one that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll. At the time, critics were divided, with some finding it confusing and others praising its artistry. But over the decades, it has become a cult classic, celebrated for its uniqueness and Bowie's magnetic performance. Few films capture the feeling of being an outsider, not just on a planet, but within society itself, as powerfully as this one. The Man Who Fell to Earth isn't an easy watch, but that's part of its power. It's challenging, unsettling, and undeniably fascinating. Bowie didn't just play an alien, he embodied one. And that's why the film still feels like a haunting transmission from a future that never quite arrived. The 1970s gave us sci-fi that was bold, bizarre, and ahead of its time. These films weren't just entertainment, they were warnings, experiments, and dreams of what could be. Some reshaped Hollywood forever, while others quietly built cult followings that still thrive today. Which of these futuristic visions still blows your mind? Drop your pick in the comments, subscribe for more deep dives, and remember, sometimes the past idea of the future says more than we realize.